Good morning. I'm Joey Haber from the Flying Tortoise Academy in Portland, Oregon, and welcome to another daily Gong Fu workout. Today we're going to go over some of the named step of Baguo Zong, the Kobu, the Bambu, and the stepping behind Yebu. Hope you all enjoy it. If you have any questions, comments, or requests, let me know. Take care.
Plants had instinctively dehydrated and turned into lifeless bundles of dry fiber lying against the ground. Under the starlight, the ground looked like a giant sheet of cold metal. This was the loneliest time. In the deep silence of midnight, the universe revealed itself to its listeners as a vast desolation. What the listener of post 1379 disliked the most was seeing the waves that slowly crawled across the display, a visual record of the meaningless noise the listening post picked up from space. He felt this interminable wave was an abstract view of the universe, one end connected to the endless past, the other to the endless future, and in the middle only the ups and downs of random chance, without life, without pattern, the peaks and valleys at different heights like uneven grains of sand, the whole curve like a one-dimensional desert made of all the grains of sand lined up in a row. Lonely, desolate, so long that it was intolerable. You could follow it and go forward or backward as long as you liked, but you'd never find the end. On this day, however, the listener saw something odd when he glanced at the waveform display. Even experts had a hard time telling with the naked eye whether a waveform carried information, but the listener was so familiar with the noise of the universe that he could tell that the wave that now moved in front of his eyes had something extra. The thin curve, rising and falling, seemed to possess a soul. He was certain that the radio signal before him had been modulated by intelligence. He rushed in front of another terminal and checked the computer's rating of the signal's recognizability, a red 10. Before this, no radio signal received by the listening post had ever garnered a recognizability rating above a blue 2. A red rating meant the likelihood that the transmission contained intelligent information was greater than 90%. A rating of red 10 meant the received transmission contained a self-interpreting coding system. The deciphering computer worked at full power. Still caught up by the dizzying excitement and confusion, the listener stared at the waveform display. Information continued to stream from the universe into the antenna. Because of the self-interpreting code, the computer was able to perform real-time translation, and the message began to show up immediately. The listener opened the resulting document, and for the first time, a Tri-Solaran read a message from another world. With the best of intentions, we look forward to establishing contact with other civilized societies in the universe. We look forward to working together with you to build a better life in this vast universe. During the next 2 Tri-Solaran hours, the listener learned of the existence of Earth, learned of the world that had only one sun and remained always in a stable era, learned of the human civilization that had been born in a paradise where the climate was eternally mild. The transmission from the solar system ended. The deciphering computer now ran uselessly. The post was once again only hearing the noise of the universe. But the listener was certain that what he had just experienced was not a dream. He knew as well that the several thousand listening posts spread across Tri-Solaris had also received this message, which Tri-Solaran civilization had awaited for eons. 200 cycles of civilization had been crawling through a dark tunnel, and there was finally a glimmer of light before them. The listener read over the message from the Earth again. His thoughts drifted over the blue ocean that never froze, and the green forests and fields, enjoying the warm sunlight and the caress of a cool breeze. What a beautiful world. The paradise we imagined really exists. The thrill and excitement cooled, and all that remained was a sense of loss and desolation. During the long loneliness of the past, the listener had asked himself more than once, even if one day a message from an extra Tri-Solaran civilization were to arrive, what would that have to do with me? His own lonely and humble life would not change one iota because of it. possess it in my dream. And the listener drifted off to sleep. In their harsh environment, the Trisolarans had evolved the ability to switch sleep on and off. A Trisolaran could put himself to sleep in seconds. But he did not get the dream that he wanted. The blue Earth did appear in his dream, but under the bombardment of an enormous interstellar fleet, the beautiful continents of Earth were burning. The deep blue oceans were boiling and evaporating. The listener woke up from his nightmare and saw the giant moon, just risen, casting a thin ray of cold light through the small window. He looked at the frozen ground outside the window and reviewed his lonely life. By now, he had lived 600,000 Trisolaran hours. The life expectancy of Trisolarans ranged between 700 to 800,000 Trisolaran hours. Most people, of course, would have lost the ability to work productively long before then. They would have been forcibly dehydrated, and the resulting dry fibers cast to the flames. Trisolaris did not keep the idle around. But now the listener saw another possibility. It was inaccurate to say that the receipt of the extra Trisolaran message had no influence on his life. After confirmation, Trisolaris would surely reduce the number of listening posts. And posts like this one, behind the times, would be among the first to be cut. Then he would be unemployed. A listener's skills were very specialized, consisting only of some routine operations and maintenance. It would be very difficult to find another job. If he couldn't find another job within 5,000 Trisolaran hours, he would be forcibly dehydrated and then burnt. The only way to escape this fate was to mate with a member of the opposite sex. When that happened, the organic material making up their bodies would meld into one. 2/3 of the material would then become fuel to power the biochemical reaction that would completely renew the cells in the remaining 1/3 and create a new body. Then, this body would divide into 3 to 5 tiny new lives, their children. They would inherit some of the memories of their parents, continue their lives, and begin the cycle of life anew. But given the listener's low social position, lonely and enclosed workspace, and advanced age, what member of the opposite sex would be interested in him? In the last few years, the listener had asked himself millions of times, is this all there is to my life? And millions of times, he had answered himself, yes, this is all there is. All that you have in this life is the endless loneliness in the tiny space of this listening post. He couldn't lose that paradise, even if it was only in a dream. The listener knew that at the scale of the universe, due to the lack of a sufficiently long measurement baseline, it was impossible to determine the distance of a source of low-frequency radio transmission from space, only the direction. The source could be high-powered but far away, or low-powered but close by. In that direction were billions of stars, each shining against a sea of other stars at different distances. Without knowing how far away the source was, it was impossible to ascertain its exact coordinates. Distance. The key was distance. Indeed, there was an easy way to ascertain the distance of the transmission source. Just respond to the message, and if the other party replies quickly to the response, the Trisolarans could determine the distance based on the round-trip time and the speed of light. Or maybe they would take a really long time to reply and cause the Trisolarans to be unable to determine how long the message was en route. But the question was, would the other party reply? Since this source had actively sent out a call into the universe, it was very likely that they would reply after getting a response from Trisolaris. And the listener was sure that the Trisolaran government had already given the order to send a message to that distant world to lure them to respond. Maybe the message had already been sent, but maybe not. If the latter was true, then the listener had a singular chance to make his own humble life glow. The listener dashed in front of the operation screen and composed a short, simple message on the computer. He directed the computer to translate the message into the same language as the message received from the Earth. Then, he pointed the listening post's antenna in the direction the message from Earth had come from. The transmit button was a red rectangle. The listener's fingers hovered above it. The fate of Tri-Solaran civilization was now tied to these slender fingers. Without hesitation, the listener pressed the button. A high-powered radio wave carried that short message, a message that could save another civilization into the darkness of space. Do not answer. Do not answer. Do not answer. We don't know what the official residence of the Princeps of Tri-Solaris looked like, but we can be sure that thick walls separated him from the outside so as to protect him against the extreme weather. The pyramid from the three-body game was one guess about what it could look like. That they built the residence deep underground is another. 5 Tri-Solaran hours earlier, the Princeps received the report of the extra Tri-Solaran communication. 2 Tri-Solaran hours earlier, he received another report. Listening post 1379 had sent out a warning message in the direction of the transmission. The first report did not cause him to leap up in ecstasy, and the second report did not cause him to sink into depression. He wasn't even angry or resentful. All of these emotions, and other emotions such as fear, sorrow, happiness, and appreciation of beauty, were things that the Tri-Solaran civilization strove to avoid and eliminate. Such emotions caused the individual and society to be weak spiritually, and did not help with survival in the harsh environment of this world. The mental states the Tri-Solarans needed were calmness and numbness. The history of the past 200-some cycles of civilization proved that civilizations that relied on these two states as their spiritual core were the most capable of survival. Why did you do this? The Princeps asked the listener from post 1379.
Bambu.
So that my life isn't wasted. The listener answered calmly. The warning you sent out may have cost Tri-Solaran civilization a chance at survival. But it gave Earth civilization such a chance. Princeps, Tri-Solaran civilization's desire to possess living space is like the desire of a man who's been starving for a long time for food, and it is similarly boundless. We cannot share the Earth with the people of that world. We could only destroy Earth civilization and completely take over that solar system. Am I right? Yes. But there is another reason for destroying Earth civilization. They are also a warlike race, very dangerous. If we try to coexist with them on the same planet, they will shortly learn our technology. Continuing in that state would allow neither civilization to thrive. Let me ask you, you wish to be the savior of the Earth, but do you not feel any sense of responsibility for your own race? I am tired of Tri-Solaris. We have nothing in our lives and spirit except the fight for survival. What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong, of course. Existence is the premise for everything else, but Princeps, please, examine our lives. Everything is devoted to survival. To permit the survival of the civilization as a whole, there's almost no respect for the individual. Someone who can no longer work is put to death. Tri-Solaran society exists under a state of extreme authoritarianism. The law has only 2 outcomes. The guilty are put to death, and the not guilty are released. For me, the most intolerable aspects are the spiritual monotony and desiccation. Anything that can lead to spiritual weakness is declared evil. We have no literature, no art, no pursuit of beauty and enjoyment. We cannot even speak of love. Princeps, is there meaning to such a life? The kind of civilization you yearn for once existed on Tri-Solaris too. They had free, democratic societies, and they left behind rich cultural legacies. You know barely anything about them. Most details have been sealed away and forbidden from view. But in all the cycles of Tri-Solaran civilization, this type of civilization was the weakest and most short-lived. A modest, chaotic air disaster was enough to extinguish them. Look again at the Earth civilization that you wish to save. A society born and bred in the eternal spring of a beautiful hothouse would not be able to survive even 1,000,000 Trisolaran hours if it were transplanted here. That flower may be delicate, but it possesses peerless splendor. She enjoys freedom and beauty in the ease of paradise. If Trisolaran civilization ultimately possesses that world, we can also create such lives for ourselves. Princeps, I'm doubtful. The metallic Trisolaran spirit has infiltrated each of our cells and solidified. You really believe it can melt again? I'm an ordinary man living at the bottom of society. No one would pay any attention to me. My life is spent alone, without wealth, without status, without love, and without hope. If I can save a distant, beautiful world that I've fallen in love with, then my life has not been wasted. Of course, Princeps, this also gave me a chance to see you. If I had not done this, a man like me could only ever hope to admire you on TV. So permit me to express myself as honored. You're guilty beyond doubt. You're the greatest criminal in all the cycles of Trisolaran civilization. But now, we make an exception in Trisolaran law. You're free to go. Why? For you, dehydration followed by burning is not even remotely adequate as punishment. You're old, and you will not live to see the final destruction of Earth civilization. But I will at least make sure that you know that you cannot save her. I want to let you live until the day she loses all hope. All right. You may leave. After the listener from post 1379 left, the Princeps called in the consul responsible for the monitoring system. The Princeps also avoided being angry at him. He dealt with it as a routine matter. How could you allow such a weak and evil man into the monitoring system? Princeps, the monitoring system employs hundreds of thousands. To screen them all strictly is very difficult. After all, the man managed to perform his duties at listening post 1379 without error for most of his life. Of course, this most serious mistake is my responsibility. Many others bear some responsibility for this failure in the Trisolaran space monitoring system. My preliminary investigation shows about 6,000, accounting for all levels. They're all guilty. Yes. Dehydrate all 6,000 and burn them together in the square in the middle of the capital. As for you, you can be the kindling. Thank you, Princeps. This will at least calm our consciences a little. Before carrying out this punishment, let me ask you, how far can that warning message travel? Listening post 1379 is a small facility without high transmission power. The maximum range may be 12 million light hours, about 1,200 light years. That's far enough. Do you have any suggestions for what Trisolaran civilization should do next? How about transmitting a carefully composed message to that world to lure them to respond? No, that might make matters worse. At least the warning message is very short. We can only hope that they ignore it or misunderstand its contents. All right. You may leave. After the consul left, the Princeps summoned the commander of the Trisolaran fleet. How long would it take to complete the preparations for the first wave of the fleet? Princeps, the fleet is still in the last phase of construction. At least 60,000 more hours are needed before the ships are spaceworthy. I will soon present my plan for approval by the joint session of consuls. After construction is complete, the fleet should set sail in that direction at once. Princeps, Given the frequency of the transmission, even the direction of the source cannot be ascertained with great accuracy. The fleet is only capable of cruising at 1/100th the speed of light. Also, it only has enough power in reserve to perform one deceleration, making it impossible to conduct a wide area search in that direction. If the distance to the target is unclear, the fleet will ultimately fall into the abyss of space. Look at the three suns around us. At any moment, the plasma outer layer of one of them may begin to expand and swallow its last planet, our world. We have no other choice. We must make this gamble. 33. Trisolaris, Sophon. 85,000 Trisolaran hours, about 8.6 Earth years later. The Princeps had ordered an emergency meeting of all Trisolaran consuls. This was very unusual. Something important must have happened. 20,000 Trisolaran hours ago, the Trisolaran fleet had launched. The ships knew the approximate direction of their target, but not its distance. It was possible that the target was millions of light hours away, or even at the other end of the galaxy. Faced with the endless sea of stars, the expedition had little hope. The meeting of consuls occurred under the Pendulum Monument. As Wang Miao read about this episode, he couldn't help but recall the session at the UN building in the three-body game. In reality, the Pendulum Monument was one of the few objects in the game that really did exist on Trisolaris. The Princeps' choice of meeting site confused most of the attendees. The chaotic era wasn't over yet, and a small sun had just risen over the horizon, though it could also set at any moment. The temperature was cold, and all the attendees were forced to wear fully enclosed electric heating suits. The massive metal pendulum swung magnificently, pounding the frigid air. The small sun cast a long shadow against the ground, as if a giant whose head touched the sky were striding there. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the Princeps ascended onto the base of the pendulum and flipped a red switch. He turned to the consuls and said, "I have just shut off power to the pendulum. It will gradually stop under the influence of air resistance." "Princeps, why?" a consul asked. "We all understand the historical significance of the pendulum. It's intended to hypnotize God. Now we know it's better for Trisolaran civilization to have God awake, because God is now blessing us." Everyone was silent, pondering the meaning of the Princeps' words. After 3 more swings from the pendulum, someone asked, "Has the Earth responded?" The Princeps nodded. "Yes. Half an hour ago I received the report. It was a response to the warning that was sent." "So soon? Only 80,000 hours have passed since then, which means that the Earth is only 40,000 light hours from us." "Isn't that the closest star from here?" "Yes. That is why I said God is blessing Trisolaran civilization." The attendees grew ecstatic, but they couldn't express the feeling, so the crowd seemed like a pent-up volcano. The Princeps knew that allowing such weak emotions to explode would be dangerous, so he poured cold water on their sentiments. "I've already ordered the Trisolaran fleet to turn toward this star, but things are not quite as optimistic as you think. Given what we know, right now the fleet is sailing towards certain death." The consuls calmed down. "Does anyone understand my conclusion?" "I do," said the science consul. "We've all studied the first messages from Earth carefully. The section most worthy of attention is their history. Let's observe the facts. Humans took more than 100,000 Earth years to progress from the hunter-gatherer age to the agricultural age. To get from the agricultural age to the industrial age took a few thousand Earth years. But to go from the industrial age to the atomic age took only 200 Earth years. Thereafter, in only a few Earth decades, they entered the information age. This civilization possesses the terrifying ability to accelerate their progress. On Tri-Solaris, of the more than 200 civilizations, including our own, none has ever experienced such accelerating development. The progress of science and technology in all Tri-Solaran civilizations has been at a constant or decelerating pace. In our world, each technology age requires approximately the same amount of time for steady, slow development. The Princeps nodded. The fact is that 4,500,000 hours from now, when the Tri-Solaran fleet has reached the Earth, that civilization's technology level will have long surpassed ours due to their accelerating development. The journey of the Tri-Solaran fleet is long and arduous, and the fleet must pass through 2 interstellar dust belts. It's very likely that only half of the ships will reach the Earth's solar system, while the rest perish along the way. And then, the Tri-Solaran fleet will be at the mercy of a much more powerful Earth civilization. This is not an expedition, but a funeral procession. But if this is true, Princeps, then there are even more frightening consequences. The military consul said. Yes, it's easy to imagine. The location of Tri-Solaris has been exposed. To eliminate future threats, an interstellar fleet from Earth will launch a counterattack against us. It's very possible that long before an expanded sun swallows this planet, Tri-Solaran civilization will have already been extinguished by humans. The bright future had suddenly turned impossibly grim. The attendees fell silent. The Princeps said, "What we must do next is contain the progress of science on Earth. Luckily, as soon as we received the first messages from Earth, we began to develop plans to do so. As of now, we've discovered a favorable condition for realizing these plans. The response we just received was sent by an Earth trader. Thus, we have reason to believe that there are many alienated forces within Earth civilization, and we must exploit such forces to the fullest." Princeps, that is not at all easy. We have but a thin thread of communication with the Earth. It takes more than 80,000 hours to complete an exchange. But remember that, like us, the knowledge that there are extraterrestrial civilizations will shock all of Earth's society and leave profound marks. We have reason to believe that the alienated forces within Earth civilization will coalesce and grow. What can they do? Sabotage? Given a time gap of 40,000 hours, the strategic value of any traditional tactics of war or terror is insignificant, and they can recover from them. To effectively contain a civilization's development and disarm it across such a long span of time, there is only one way. Kill its science. The science consul said, "The plan focuses on emphasizing the negative environmental effects of scientific development and showing signs of supernatural power to the population of Earth. In addition to highlighting the negative effects of progress, we'll also attempt to use a series of miracles to construct an illusory universe that cannot be explained by the logic of science. After these illusions have been maintained for some time, it's possible that Tri-Solaran civilization may become a target of religious worship there. Then unscientific ways of thinking will dominate scientific thinking among human intellectuals and lead to the collapse of the entire scientific system of thought." How do we create miracles? The key to miracles is that they cannot be seen as tricks. This may require that we transfer certain technologies far above current human technology level to the alienated forces on Earth. That's too risky. Who knows who'll ultimately control such technologies? That's playing with fire. Of course, which specific technologies should be transferred to produce miracles requires further study. Please hold on for a moment, Science Consul, said the military consul as he stood up. Princeps, I'm of the opinion that this plan will be almost useless in terms of stopping human science. But it's better than nothing? The science consul argued. Barely, the military consul said contemptuously. I agree with your view, the Princeps said. This plan will only interfere slightly with human scientific development. We need a decisive act that will completely suffocate science on Earth and freeze it at its current level. Let's focus on the key here, Overall technological development depends on the advancement of basic science, and the foundation of basic science lies in the exploration of the deep structure of matter. If there's no progress in this field, there can be no major breakthrough in science and technology as a whole. Of course, this is not specific to civilization on Earth. It is applicable to all targets that Trisolaran civilization intends to conquer. We had begun work in this area even before receiving the first extra Trisolaran communication, but we've recently stepped up the effort. Now, everyone look up. What's that? The princess pointed at the sky. The consuls lifted their heads to gaze in that direction. They saw a ring in space, giving off a metallic glow in the sunlight. Is that the dock for building the second space fleet? Oh. That's a large particle accelerator still under construction. The plans for building the second space fleet have been scrapped. All resources are now devoted to Project Sophon. Project Sophon? Yes, we've kept this plan secret from most of you present. I now ask the Science Council to give an introduction. I knew about this plan, but didn't know it had progressed so far. The speaker was the Industry Council. The Culture and Education Council said, I knew about this plan as well, but thought it was like a fairy tale. The Science Council said, Project Sophon, to put it simply, aims to transform a proton into a super-intelligent computer. This is a science fantasy that most of us have heard about, the Agricultural Council said. But can it be realized? I know that physicists can already manipulate 9 of the 11 dimensions of the microscale world, but we still can't imagine how they could stick a pair of tiny tweezers into a proton to build large-scale integrated circuits. Of course, that's impossible. The etching of micro-integrated circuits can only occur at the macro scale, and only on a macroscopic two-dimensional plane. Thus, we must unfold a proton into 2 dimensions. Unfold a 9-dimensional structure into 2 dimensions? How big would the area be? Very big, as you will see. The Science Council smiled. Another 60,000 Trisolaran hours went by. 20,000 Trisolaran hours after the completion of the huge particle accelerator in space, the unfolding of the proton into 2 dimensions was about to begin in a synchronous orbit around Trisolaris. It was a beautiful and mild, stable air day. The sky was particularly clear. Like the day when the fleet had set sail 80,000 Trisolaran hours ago, the entire population of Trisolaris looked up into the sky, gazing at that giant ring. The princeps and all the consuls again came and stood under the pendulum monument. The pendulum had long stopped, and the weight hung still like a solid rock between the tall pillars. Looking at it, it was hard to believe that it had once moved. The Science Council gave the order to unfold into 2 dimensions. In space, 3 cubes drifted around the ring, the fusion generators that powered the accelerator. Their wing-like heat sinks gradually began to glow with a dim reddish light. The crowd anxiously stared at the accelerator, but nothing seemed to happen. A tenth of a Trisolaran hour later, the Science Council held his earpiece to his ear and listened intently. Then he said, Princeps, unfortunately, the unfolding failed. We reduced the dimensions by 1 too many, and the proton became one-dimensional. One-dimensional? A line? Yes, an infinitely thin line. Theoretically, it should be about 1,500 light hours long. We spent the resources intended for another space fleet, said the military council, just to obtain a result like this. In scientific experiments, there has to be a process during which kinks are worked out. After all, this was the very first time the unfolding has been tried. The crowd dispersed in disappointment, but the experiment wasn't over. Originally, it was thought that the one-dimensional proton would stay in synchronous orbit around Trisolaris forever. But due to friction from solar winds, pieces of the string fell back into the atmosphere. 6 trisolaren hours later, everyone outside noticed the strange lights in the air, gossamer threads that flickered in and out of existence. They soon learned from the news that this was the one-dimensional proton drifting to the ground under the influence of gravity. Even though the string was infinitely thin, it produced a field that could still reflect visible light. It was the first time people had ever seen matter not made out of atoms. The silky strands were merely small portions of a proton. These things are so annoying. The princeps brushed his hand against his face over and over. He and the science console were standing on the wide steps in front of Government Center. My face always feels itchy. Princeps, the feeling is purely psychological. All the strings added together have the mass of a single proton, so it's impossible for them to have any effect on the macroscopic world. They can't do any harm. It's as if they don't exist. But the threads that fell from the sky grew more numerous and denser. Closer to ground, tiny sparkling lights filled the air. The sun and the stars all appeared inside silvery halos. The strings clung to those who went outside, and as they walked, they dragged the lights behind them. When people returned indoors, the lines glimmered under the lamps. As soon as they moved, the reflection from the strings revealed the patterns in the air currents they disturbed. Although the one-dimensional string could only be seen under light and couldn't be felt, people became upset. The torrent of one-dimensional strings continued for more than 20 trisolaren hours, before finally ending, though not because the strings had all fallen to the ground. Although their mass was unimaginably minuscule, they still had some, and so their acceleration under gravity was the same as normal matter. However, once inside the atmosphere, they were completely dominated by the air currents and would never fall to the ground. After being unfolded into one dimension, the strong nuclear force within the proton became far more attenuated, weakening the string. Gradually, it broke into tiny pieces, and the light they reflected was no longer visible. People thought they had disappeared, but pieces of the one-dimensional string would drift in the air of Trisolaris forever. 50 trisolaren hours later, the second attempt to unfold a proton into 2 dimensions began. Soon, the crowd on the ground saw something odd. After the heat sinks of the fusion generators began to glow red, several colossal objects appeared near the accelerator. All of them were in the form of regular geometric solids, spheres, tetrahedrons, cubes, cones, and so on. Their surfaces had complex coloration, but close examination showed that they were in fact colorless. The surfaces of the geometric solids were completely reflective, and what the people saw were just distorted, reflected images of the surface of Trisolaris. Have we succeeded? The princeps asked. Is that the proton unfolded into 2 dimensions? The science console replied, Princeps, it's still a failure. I just received the report from the accelerator control center. The unfolding left one too many dimensions in, and the proton was unfolded into 3 dimensions. The giant reflective geometric solids continued to pop into existence in great numbers, and their forms became more various. There were tori, solid crosses, and
Okay, it's the time we have for today. Thank you so much for watching, and stay safe.